Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, Tadej Pogačar makes history, becoming the first rider ever to win the Tour de France and the World Road Championships in back-to-back years. I'll be talking about why it wasn't a surprise, but why the women's winner was, and wrapping up the rest of the racing from Rwanda and around the world too. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that the World Championships in Rwanda was a great success. The racing was fantastic, the crowds even better, exuberant and incredibly respectful at the same time. We also learnt that Juan Ayuso has signed another long-term contract. He'll be with Lidl-Trek for the next 5 years if both sides keep to that contract. With a number of high-profile contracts being broken in the last couple of years, I know that a lot of people are wondering whether they're actually worth the paper that they're written on. We shall see. And finally, we learned that Tadej Pogačar is still the best rider in the world, and it's not even really close. It's come to the point of the Pogačar era where we're all wondering, I think, whether A, somebody's going to step up and go toe-to-toe with him, or B, he loses a percentage or two and suddenly doesn't look quite as dominant as he is now. And it's probably not just us thinking that, but the riders as well. Yesterday's men's road race had the potential to be really interesting from that point of view, because some of the other super talents from his trade team, UAE Emirates, were in theory at least there to challenge Pogačar rather than ride for him. Now, there was a point on Mount Kigali, the biggest climb in the race, where it felt like the entire first part of the peloton was made up of UAE riders from different nations. And that became even more pronounced as Pogačar pressed the pace towards the top of that climb. One by one, riders dropped off the wheel until only Juan Ayuso was left. Then Del Toro managed to bridge across to them, and so we had 3 teammates from different countries off the front of the race. And you're like, okay, this seems like it could get kind of interesting. For a small section of the race there, I genuinely pondered whether Pogačar might not win the race. He looked the least comfortable down that first descent after that climb, and then on the Mur de Kigali, that steep cobbled climb, I genuinely think that Isaac Del Toro really put the hurt on Pogačar. Pogačar's cause wasn't helped by Ayuso on that climb because he couldn't hold Del Toro's wheel and seemed to drop like a stone. But to me, Poggy just didn't look comfortable on that climb. Anyway, we're then down to 2 riders and there's still over 90 kilometres of the race remaining. Australia and Belgium start chasing behind and the gap is less than a minute. So you're still thinking, okay, he got caught at Amstel Gold earlier this year. He came close to being caught in last year's World Championships. This thing ain't over yet. And that thought actually grew stronger in my mind when Del Toro started to suffer later. We later found out that that was due to stomach cramps. Initially, Pogačar waited for him and the gap came down to just 40 seconds to the chasers behind, but then he had no option but to go solo with about 66 k's remaining. Now it's easy to say in hindsight, but how did I ever doubt him? He is the best rider in the world on the hardest World Championships course that they've seen in decades. What are domestics behind really going to be able to do to chase him down? What are the other leaders going to be able to do to chase him down behind? Well, we soon got the answer to both of those questions. Absolutely nothing. Pogačar rode at a metronomic pace over those final 6 laps around Kigali. He never looked like he was about to blow up, and in reality, he never looked like he might get caught. Now, the 2025 season is obviously not over quite yet, but it's already one of the most successful single seasons in the history of the sport. No other rider in history has ever finished on the podium of Milano-San Remo, the Tour of Flanders, Paris-Roubaix, Liège-Bastogne-Liège and the World Championships in the same year, let alone win the Tour de France and a bunch of other races along the way. Now, we should be used to it by now, of course, but at the same time, it is still astounding, isn't it? The World Championships yesterday was his 17th win of the season so far, and every single one of them has been a World Tour or World Championships level. And I said in last week's show that Pogačar's relatively lacklustre performance in the individual time trial didn't change my thoughts on how the road race was going to unfold, and so it proved to be. And what else can you say really? Not a lot, and so I'm going to focus now on Remco Evenepoel's race. The Belgian started as the second favourite, and rightly so. His win in the time trial was a dominant one, and he himself has a history of success in the biggest one-day championships. But, as is so often the case with Remco Evenepoel, his race didn't go smoothly and there was the inevitable drama. So on Mount Kigali, he was in the front split with Pogačar initially, but then appeared to blow his doors completely. Riders were just flying past him like he was stood still. Now, we later found out that he'd hit a pothole and his saddle had tilted down. Whether that offers a complete explanation on why he looked so bad at that point is debatable, but there's no doubt that he proved his strength later in the race. He eventually changed his bike in the pits and made his way back through the groups. But then he felt that the saddle on his new bike was too high, and this is where things looked like they were really about to completely unravel. Rather than continue to ride on until he knew that his team car was just behind him, which is what he really should have done, he made the decision to stop by the side of the road, and it was a lengthy wait, long enough to give him the opportunity to kick a bottle of water out of frustration. An impressive looking kick, I've got to say, but it was clear he was using energy unnecessarily, predominantly mental energy, I would say. Once he finally got his original bike back with the saddle fixed, he had a big gap to close. He was helped fairly significantly by the team car, but nevertheless, that must have cost him some energy. And so you can see why he was initially so disappointed with the silver medal. In his head, those mechanicals might have cost him the win. And maybe he's right. Personally, though, I don't think anybody was going to beat Tadej Pogačar yesterday. Evenepoel was clearly strong. He rode Pidcock out of that group and then later attacked Ben Healy and Matthias Skjelmose. But the gap to Pogačar remained constant and Evenepoel ended up crossing the finish line just under a minute and a half behind him. Now at this point, I think we just have to accept that Remco is Remco. There will often be drama with him when he races, and he is likely to throw his toys out of the pram when it comes, but he's probably never going to change. That's just his personality and his temperament. Gold and silver at the World Championships in 1 week is nothing to be sniffed at, that's for sure. But let me know what you think. Could he have challenged Pogačar if he'd had a smoother race? I look forward to reading your opinions in the comments section just down below. The best of the non-aliens yesterday was Ben Healy, who took Ireland's first medal at the race since Sean Kelly in 1989. I mean, he's a hell of a rider, Ben Healy, isn't he? In many other eras, he'd be winning even more. And in some ways, it feels he's been unlucky to find himself racing in an era where 3 riders are dominating the major one-day races. But he can be extremely proud of that ride, I'd say, and that result. I don't think there's anything else that he could have done to be better, actually. And Matthias Skjelmose took 4th place for Denmark on the day. I'm sure he was disappointed not to take a medal, but again, I'm not too sure there's much he could have done differently on the day. On the hardest course in decades, he was the 4th strongest rider in the world. Chapeau. Talking of tipping hats, can we all take a moment to congratulate Latvia's Tom Skoins? He's the new self-proclaimed world champion of riders who are over 70 kilograms. Now his record in the big championships over the last year or so has been second to none. So he's been top 5 at the last 2 world championships and at the Olympic Games as well. And for a rider who's not even a leader in his own trade team for the biggest races, that is some going. Giulio Ciccone, his trade teammate, took 6th for Italy, outsprinting Del Toro and Ayuso in what was the only group in the top 10. Alfonso Eulalio took 9th place for Portugal and Tom Pidcock 10th for Great Britain. I'm going to mention 11th too because that was Primož Roglic, who rode as the perfect teammate to Pogačar on the day. And I'm also going to mention Paul Sexas in 13th. He was attacking near the start for France, up there with some of the best riders in the world during the hardest parts of the race. And so to finish that high up, having only just turned 19, is really quite exceptional. Okay, I'm going to move on to the women's race now, which couldn't really have been more in contrast to the men's in the way that it panned out. Their race didn't take in the big climb, but rather stayed on the smaller circuit from start to finish. Now a reminder, the big pre-race favourites were Pauline Ferrand-Prévot and Demi Vollering of France and the Netherlands respectively. Carina Schrempf was the only early animator of the race for Austria, going solo and staying out front for quite a long time, but she was always on a hiding to nothing, particularly on such a tough course. She was later joined by Julie van der Velde of Belgium and Shirin van Androoy of the Netherlands. Ultimately though, those attacks came to nothing and the first serious action came with about 35 kilometres remaining. Evita Musique of France went on the move and she was followed by the likes of Marcus, Malcotti, Fischer-Black, Niedermayer, Garcia and Valieres. And it's interesting to watch that portion of the race back because initially that group wasn't going at warp speed. It was quite cagey actually, but it was even more cagey in the group of favourites behind them. For a while, they were in a block across the road, that group of favourites, and so the gap quickly ballooned. Now, despite having representation up front, Australia, France and the Netherlands did all at different times contribute to a chase behind, and whilst it was sporadic and not really fully committed, it was enough to keep the gap at around half a minute for a while. Because after an attack by Elisa Longo Borghini was caught, they almost came to a complete standstill again. And so with 26 kilometres remaining, the gap went over a minute for the first time. As the bell rang, signalling 1 lap to go, Marlon Reusser of Switzerland attacked and went clear over the top of the climb, and it looked like we might finally have a rider capable of bridging to the front. In the end though, Reusser was caught by her teammate Elise Chabbey, and she rode flat out for her. Meanwhile, up front, the group was gradually thinning down until we had just 3 riders left at the front of the race. Niamh Fisher-Black of New Zealand, Magdalene Valieres of Canada and Mavi Garcia of Spain. They reached the foot of the final climb with quite a clear gap over everybody else. And I think most people had Fisher-Black down as the favourite at that point, but Valieres had other ideas. She hit out at the very foot of that final climb, immediately gapping the other 2. Had she gone too early? Absolutely not, we found out. She continued to extend her lead almost all the way up that final climb and rode to the gold medal and the rainbow bands. And I think that is probably the biggest upset at the major championships since Anna Kiesenhofer won the Olympic road race in Tokyo. Valieres had had just 1 single pro race win before Saturday, but now she's world champion. Fisher-Black took silver on the day, whilst Garcia just held off Chabbey to take bronze at the age of 41. Fair play though to Valieres. As it turned out, you had to be in that group to win it, and of that group, she was the strongest. So you have to say she was the deserving winner. And you could see she was in utter disbelief as she crossed the finish line. And I would imagine that is a win that's going to take a few months rather than days to really sink in for her. Questions do need to be asked though about what happened in the group of favourites behind. Longo Borghini, Ferrand-Prévot and Le Court-Pinard all put in big attacks, but there was just no cohesion at all in that group. The Dutch and the French did have a rider in that front group, but not one that you could say, yeah, we're going to win it if they stay away. We saw that because neither nation got a medal in the end, which makes you question why they were there in the first place. Yes, of course, you can have scenarios where it's advantageous to have a teammate up the road, but not if you never catch them. At a point, you just need to say, look, we've got Vollering, or we've got Ferrand-Prévot, or we've got Longo Borghini, so we're going to lay it all on the line to at least give them a chance to ride for the win. As it was, we never really got to see who was the best from that group, because when the win was clearly out of the question for them, a lot of them just sat up and cruised to the finish line. Again, let me know your thoughts on that situation in the comment section just down below. Okay, I'm going to move on to a quick wrap up of the other races from last week in Rwanda now. In the U23 men's, Lorenzo Fin of Italy underlined his incredible talent. He was the youngest rider in the race and rode solo to the line just 1 year after winning the junior championships in Zurich. He's supposed to be continuing with Red Bull's development team next year, but you wonder whether they'll offer him the step up sooner than planned. In the inaugural U23 women's race, it was another youngster who took the rainbow bands. You may remember Célie Guéry of France because she won 3 stages of the Tour de l'Avenir back in August. Well, she got the better of Slovakia's Victoria Shaladnova up the finishing climb. The junior women's race, Paula Ostiz won in what was a small group sprint for Spain, whilst in the men's, Harry Hudson made history by becoming the first ever Brit to win that race. And Great Britain actually placed 3 riders in the top 5. Jakob Söderqvist and Zoe Bagstedt of Sweden and Great Britain respectively dominated the U23 time trials, whilst Michael Maurice and Megan Arends of Netherlands won in the junior events. There were a couple of other races outside of the World Champs last week. Arnaud Delis of Lotto took his 3rd win from 3 race days at Paris-Sauvigny. He was in a class of his own in the sprint to the line, finishing lengths clear despite sitting up before the finish. Tim Merlier won the Omloop Van Het Houtland, whilst over at the Tour de Langkawi, the first 2 stages have been won in sprints by Matteo Malacelli and Arvid de Klein respectively. A reminder now that you can watch a full season of bike racing live on Discovery Plus or Max. This week that's going to include the European Championships, in which we'll see a lot of the big stars from the world, plus the Sparks and Münsterland Giro and the Giro dell'Emilia. Right, transfer news now, and I'll start by circling back on that Juan Ayuso news. So as rumoured by a few people, the likes of Dan Benson, he signed with Lidl-Trek on what is a 5-year deal that's going to take him through to the end of 2030. Now, his arrival wasn't met entirely positively by team members. Matthias Skjelmose told reporters that the team hadn't told him about the transfer before it was announced, going on to say, "If Ayuso finds it difficult to ride with Tadej Pogačar at UAE, then I don't know if he'll want to help me at all when it comes down to it." And so it already seems like the management will have a big job on their hands to keep everyone in that team happy. But I'm excited to see what Ayuso can do next year. It is quite easy to forget how much the early part of his career has been disrupted through injury and illness. So if he gets a clean run at his big goals next year, it's going to be very interesting to see just what sort of level he can get to. In other transfer news, Jakob Ormsel, winner of the Giro Next Gen earlier this year, moves up to the main squad from Bahrain's development team. Alessandro Borgo of Italy makes the same move. And just finally, the American Will Barter is moving to Tudor Pro Cycling, having spent the last 4 years with Team Movistar. Right, that is all for this week. I'll be back next Monday to wrap up the European Champs and all the other pro races. See you then.